September 11th, 1697. Dawn breaks cold over the Tisza River in the Hungarian plains, and mist rises from the water like the breath of ghosts. On the eastern bank, 60,000 Ottoman soldiers wait to cross a bridge built from 60 boats lashed together with rope and iron chains. The pontoon structure stretches across the dark current like a jewelled serpent, its wooden planks slick with morning dew. Half the Sultan's army has already reached the western shore, cavalry, artillery, the imperial baggage train heavy with plundered gold. But the infantry remains trapped on the wrong side of the river, protected only by hastily dug trenches and a wall of overturned wagons. They do not know that 50,000 Habsburg soldiers are closing in from the east. The numbers tell a story of miscalculation. Sultan Mustafa II commands 100,000 men, the largest Ottoman army assembled in a decade. Prince Eugene of Savoy leads a force half that size, many of them so poorly supplied they march with rags wrapped around bleeding feet. But Eugene has something the Sultan lacks: perfect knowledge of his enemy's position and the ruthlessness to exploit it. In his pocket sits a letter from Vienna, sealed with the emperor's mark, ordering him to avoid battle at all costs. He has chosen to disobey. The stakes escalate beyond this muddy riverbank. Tactically, the Ottomans are divided and vulnerable, their greatest strengths, cavalry and artillery, on the opposite side of an impassable barrier. Strategically, this represents the culmination of 14 years of savage warfare that began when Ottoman armies stood at the gates of Vienna. The Great Turkish War has bled both empires white, and whoever holds this field will dominate Central Europe for the next century. But the stakes rise higher still, to the level of civilizational survival. For 300 years, the Ottoman Empire has expanded relentlessly into Christian Europe, swallowing kingdoms, enslaving populations, pushing westward with the inevitability of a flood. This morning, that tide will turn. This is the battle that shattered Ottoman power in the Balkans. This is the first time an enemy would capture the sacred seal of a reigning sultan. This is the beginning of the long Ottoman decline, the moment when Europe's greatest threat became its sick man, slowly dying for 2 more centuries. And it happened because one 34-year-old prince, watching from an eastern ridge as his exhausted soldiers emerged from the swamps, made a decision that would echo through history. He would attack now, and damn the consequences. The sun climbs higher. The moment approaches. At Zenta, the future of 2 empires hangs on what happens in the next 4 hours. To understand why these armies face each other across the Tisza, you must go back 14 years to the summer of 1683, when Ottoman forces laid siege to Vienna. The Sultan's armies had reached the Habsburg capital itself, the great prize that had eluded their predecessors. For 2 months, they battered the walls while Europe held its breath. Then Polish King Jan Sobieski arrived with relief forces, and in a single day of desperate fighting, the Ottoman siege collapsed. It was not merely a defeat, it was a revelation. The unstoppable empire could be stopped. Vienna ignited a crusade. Pope Innocent XI forged the Holy League, Austria, Poland, Venice, and later Russia, all united against the common enemy. For the first time in memory, Christian Europe fought as one. The war that followed consumed a generation. Habsburg armies drove south, recapturing Buda after a century and a half of Ottoman occupation. They took Belgrade. They swept across the Hungarian plains. By 1688, it seemed the Ottoman Empire in Europe might collapse entirely, but empires do not die easily. In 1690, a reorganized Ottoman army recaptured Belgrade. The momentum shifted. Habsburg generals, distracted by renewed war against France in the west, failed to deliver a knockout blow. The conflict ground into a bloody stalemate. Neither side able to force victory, both sides bleeding treasure and men into the Hungarian earth. By 1697, 14 years after Vienna, the war had become a test of endurance. Whichever empire collapsed first would lose everything. That spring, Sultan Mustafa II decided to break the deadlock personally. At 33 years old, he represented a new generation of Ottoman leadership, educated, pious, determined to reclaim what his father's generation had lost. Unlike the previous three sultans who had delegated command to their grand viziers, Mustafa would lead his armies himself, the first to do so in decades. He had proven himself in 3 consecutive campaigns. In 1695 at Lugos, he had personally led cavalry charges, his sword flashing in the front ranks while cannonballs passed overhead. In 1696 at Ulaş and Chennai, his armies crushed Habsburg forces and pushed them back toward Vienna. European courts spoke his name with grudging respect. Mustafa prepared his 1697 campaign with religious fervour. When advisers warned of the expense, he responded with words that revealed his character. "I do not need money. I will eat stale bread if necessary. I sacrifice my body in the way of religion. Whatever trouble comes, I will be patient." He meant it. This was not mere conquest for him, but a sacred duty, the recovery of Muslim lands from infidel occupation. On April 18th, he departed the palace at Edirne with 100,000 men, Janissary infantry, Sipahi cavalry, Tatar auxiliaries, 87 heavy guns. The column stretched for miles, a moving city of soldiers, camp followers, animals, and supplies. By August, he had reached Belgrade. His plan: bypass the strongly fortified Habsburg positions along the Danube, cross into Transylvania, and attack the empire's vulnerable eastern flank. It was bold, aggressive, and precisely what Eugene of Savoy had been waiting for. Eugene presented a study in contrast to the Ottoman Sultan. Born in Paris rather than a palace, the son of a French count and a niece of Cardinal Mazarin, he had grown up at the court of Louis XIV. His mother's involvement in a poisoning scandal led to her exile and young Eugene's disgrace. Worse, he possessed a slight, almost feminine build that made him the subject of mockery at Versailles. When he begged for a commission in the French army, Louis refused him, forbidding the little prince from military service anywhere in France. The rejection burned. At 19, Eugene fled across the border to offer his sword to France's greatest enemy, the Habsburg Emperor. He made his name fighting Ottomans. At 20, during the Vienna siege, he distinguished himself through reckless courage that bordered on suicidal. At Buda, he led cavalry charges into Ottoman artillery fire. At Belgrade, he took a musket ball through the knee and refused to leave the field until the city fell. By 30, he was a field marshal. By 34, when Emperor Leopold appointed him commander-in-chief of all forces in Hungary, he had spent half his life at war with the Turks. He knew their tactics, their strengths, their weaknesses. He knew how to beat them. But when Eugene arrived to take command in July of 1697, he found an army in indescribable misery. Of 70,000 men on paper, only 35,000 were fit for battle. They lacked pay, food, ammunition, medical supplies. Discipline had collapsed. Desertion was rampant. Eugene acted with characteristic energy. He borrowed money from Vienna bankers using his personal credit, paying the soldiers back wages out of his own pocket. He executed deserters and rewarded bravery. He drilled the troops relentlessly. Within weeks, he had forged a fighting force, but it remained outnumbered and undersupplied, facing a sultan determined to reconquer Hungary or die trying. The stakes transcended personal glory. For Eugene, this represented his first independent command, the chance to prove he deserved the emperor's trust. Failure meant disgrace, the end of his career, now perhaps a return to the obscurity from which he had clawed his way. For Mustafa, the campaign carried the weight of dynastic legitimacy. 3 sultans before him had been deposed or died in shame after military defeats. He needed victory to secure his throne and his empire's future. But beyond personal stakes lay national and civilizational consequences. If Mustafa succeeded, he would regain control of Transylvania, threaten Vienna again, and restore Ottoman dominance in Central Europe. The Holy League would fracture, its members seeking separate peace. The Ottoman expansion that had seemed finished at Vienna would resume, pushing deeper into Christian lands. But if Eugene won, if he could destroy this Ottoman army, the empire would lose its offensive capability for a generation. The Balkans would open to Habsburg conquest. 3 centuries of Ottoman advance into Europe would end, replaced by 3 centuries of retreat. Neither man knew that in 6 weeks they would meet at a small village called Zenta, where one of them would achieve the greatest victory of his life, and the other would suffer the worst defeat in Ottoman military history. The Tisza River cuts through the Hungarian plains like a scar through flesh, wide and slow and treacherous. In September, after the summer heat has baked the grasslands brown, the water runs lower than usual, exposing sandbars and muddy banks, but it remains a formidable barrier. The current moves with deceptive strength. A man in armour who falls in will drown before he swims 10 yards. For an army, crossing represents a moment of maximum vulnerability. Half your forces on one bank, half on the other. There's all of them strung along a single narrow bridge that enemy artillery could destroy in minutes. The village of Zenta sits at a natural ford where the river bends, creating shallower water and firm approaches on both sides. It is one of the few places where a large army can cross without boats. The surrounding terrain is flat as a table, the Pannonian plain stretching in all directions, covered in grass and scattered woods. This is cavalry country, perfect for the sweeping charges that have made Ottoman Sipahis feared across Europe. But it is also killing ground for artillery, with no hills or forest to provide cover. An army caught in the open here, divided by the river, would be a field marshal's dream and a sultan's nightmare. The Ottoman army that approaches Zenta in early September numbers between 50 and 60,000 combat-effective soldiers, though official records claim 100,000. The difference consists of camp followers, servants, merchants, and the inevitable padding of muster rolls by commanders seeking to embezzle pay for non-existent troops. At the army's corps march, 15,000 janissaries, the elite infantry corps that forms the Sultan's household troops. They carry matchlock muskets accurate to 100 yards, supplemented by swords and axes for close combat. These are professional soldiers, many taken as boys from Christian families under the Devshirme system, and raised as Muslims devoted to the Sultan. They have crushed rebellions from Baghdad to Belgrade. They fear nothing. The cavalry numbers perhaps 20,000, though many horses are worn from the long march from Edirne. The Sipahis are provincial cavalry, granted land in exchange for military service, each expected to provide armour, weapons and horses for himself and several retainers. They fight with composite bows, sabres and lances, employing tactics perfected over centuries of steppe warfare. In open battle, properly led, they can shatter any Christian cavalry force. But the 1697 campaign has been hard on them. Many of the best riders have been detached for raids or garrison duty. Many of the horses are sickly, and the army has accumulated an unusually high proportion of raw recruits, peasants conscripted to fill the ranks, more burden than asset. The artillery train consists of 87 heavy guns, ranging from small field pieces to massive siege bombards that require teams of oxen to move. Ottoman artillery has improved dramatically in recent decades, adopting European casting techniques and gunpowder formulas. These weapons can batter down fortress walls and devastate infantry formations at 1,000 yards, but they are slow, immobile once positioned, and utterly dependent on securing clear fields of fire. If an enemy gets among the guns, they become expensive metal sculptures. Supporting this military force comes the immense logistical tail that all pre-modern armies require. thousands of pack animals, hundreds of wagons laden with ammunition and supplies, personal servants for the officers, merchants, prostitutes, religious officials, and the Sultan's own household. The Ottoman army is not merely a military formation, but a mobile city, complete with its own economy, hierarchy, and culture. It moves slowly, consumes vast quantities of food and fodder, and requires careful management to prevent chaos. Against this force, Prince Eugene commands an army of 50,000 men, with approximately 35,000 ready for battle after his rebuilding efforts. His infantry consists of 25 regiments drawn from across the Habsburg domains, Germans, Austrians, Hungarians, Croatians, armed with flintlock muskets superior to Ottoman matchlocks and trained in linear formations that maximize firepower. They are veterans of years of Turkish fighting, hardened by combat, and possessed of that stubborn German discipline that can hold a line against repeated cavalry charges. Eugene's cavalry includes 9 regiments, mostly cuirassiers, heavy cavalry wearing three-quarter armour and armed with pistols and broadswords, and dragoons who can fight mounted or on foot. They cannot match Ottoman cavalry in manoeuvre warfare, but in a sustained melee, European horses and heavier weapons often prevail. Additionally, Eugene has secured the services of the Serbian militia under Captain Jovan Tekelija, 12,000 light cavalry who know every path and ford in this country. These men fight with personal hatred for the Ottomans who have occupied their lands for generations. They serve as scouts, guides and raiders, and it is their intelligence that will decide the coming battle. The artillery numbers 60 guns, fewer than the Ottomans, but organised with German efficiency. Each piece has its crew trained to load, aim, ease and fire with mechanical precision. Habsburg artillery uses standardized calibers and maintains supply of pre-measured powder charges, allowing rates of fire that Ottoman gunners cannot match. Eugene positions his guns carefully, knowing that in a single afternoon they must destroy an Ottoman army before it can escape. The intelligence breakthrough comes on September 10th. Serbian scouts shadowing the Ottoman army report that the enemy has reached Zenta and begun crossing the Tisza. A skirmish results in the capture of Pasha Kaffa, an Ottoman officer commanding a reconnaissance unit. Brought before Eugene, threatened with immediate execution, Kaffa reveals everything. The Sultan and his cavalry have already crossed to the western bank with the artillery. The infantry remains on the eastern side, protected by 2 hasty trenches and a barricade of overturned wagons. Most critically, the outer defensive trench is incomplete, with a large gap in its northern section. The pontoon bridge represents the only escape route, and it is already congested with troops and supplies moving in both directions. Eugene listens to this intelligence with the cold focus of a master predicting his opponent's next move. He sees the opportunity instantly. The Ottoman army is divided, vulnerable, its strengths neutralized by the river. If he can reach Zenta before the infantry completes its crossing, he can trap them against the water and annihilate them. But there are complications. The Emperor's explicit orders, carried in yesterday's dispatch, command him to act with extreme caution and avoid general engagement unless overwhelming victory is certain. Leopold fears another bloody stalemate that would drain Habsburg resources while France menaces the western frontier. He wants his eastern army preserved, not risked in a gambler's throw. Eugene calls his senior commanders to a council that evening. Guido Starhemberg, his most trusted subordinate, argues passionately for attack. The opportunity is perfect, perhaps the only chance they will get to catch the Ottoman main army in a vulnerable position. If they let the Sultan escape now, the war will drag on for years. Others express caution, pointing to the exhaustion of the troops and the risks of attacking an enemy that still outnumbers them. Eugene listens to all arguments, his face revealing nothing. Then he makes his decision. They will march at dawn. A forced march of 10 hours through difficult country to reach Zenta by mid-afternoon, in time to attack before nightfall. It is a calculated risk that will either make his reputation or destroy it. The night before battle passes in preparation. Soldiers clean their muskets and check their powder, knowing a misfire in combat means death. Officers walk among the men, offering words of encouragement or threats depending on their leadership style. Priests hear confessions and offer blessings, sprinkling holy water over kneeling ranks. Some men pray silently, lips moving as they commend their souls to God. Others sharpen blades with rhythmic scraping that sounds like conversation. A few write letters they will never send, knowing that if they fall tomorrow, no one will carry messages home. The veterans sleep when they can, having learned to rest before violence. The recruits lie awake, imagining what tomorrow will bring, their bellies tight with fear. Eugene does not sleep. He studies maps by candlelight, committing terrain features to memory, visualizing the approach march and the deployment for battle. He writes a brief letter to the emperor explaining his decision to disobey orders, a document that will serve as either vindication or evidence at his court-martial. He checks his weapons, a pair of pistols, a cavalry sabre, though he knows a field marshal commands from horseback, not the front line. But battles have a way of pulling leaders into the chaos. Better to be ready. Dawn comes cold and grey. The army forms and begins its march east toward Zenta, toward a battle that will reshape the map of Europe. The soldiers begin marching before sunrise, stumbling through darkness toward an enemy they cannot see. The route Tekalia has chosen leads through swampland, paths only locals know, ground that will conceal their movement from Ottoman scouts, but turns every step into a trial. The Tisza has many tributaries here, streams and marshes, that have transformed the plain into a maze of mud and water. Men sink to their knees in hidden bogs. Wagons become mired, requiring dozens of soldiers to heave them forward. The smell of rot rises from stagnant pools, where generations of vegetation have decayed. Mosquitoes swarm in clouds, finding exposed skin, spreading disease that will kill more men than Ottoman bullets. Eugene rides up and down the column, his horse splashing through shallow water, urging speed. Every hour matters. If they arrive too late, the Ottoman infantry will have completed their crossing and escaped. If they arrive too early, before exhaustion forces the enemy to halt for the night, the Sultan might detect their approach and withdraw. The timing must be perfect. His scouts ride ahead, maintaining contact with Serbian militia observing the Ottomans. Reports filter back. The enemy has not moved, they are still crossing. The opportunity remains. By midday, the men are beyond exhaustion. They have marched for 8 hours through terrain that would challenge fresh troops. Their uniforms are soaked with sweat and swamp water. Feet bleed inside boots never designed for this punishment. Some men collapse and cannot rise. Officers prod them with swords, screaming that any man who falls behind will be abandoned to Turkish mercy, which means torture and death. Most struggle back to their feet. A few remain in the mud, choosing death by exhaustion over the horror ahead. At 2 p.m, a courier from Vienna catches the column. He has ridden for 2 days, nearly killing his horse, to deliver sealed orders from Emperor Leopold. Eugene takes the leather dispatch case, breaks the wax seal bearing the imperial eagle, and reads the message inside. The words are unambiguous. Act with extreme caution. Forego all risks. Avoid engaging the enemy unless you have overwhelming strength and are practically certain of complete victory. It is the emperor's explicit command, backed by his authority as Holy Roman Emperor and Eugene's oath of service. To disobey is insubordination, potentially treason. Eugene folds the paper carefully, places it inside his coat, and says nothing to the courier. He does not acknowledge the order. He does not change his plans. The column continues its march. In his mind, he has already justified the disobedience. The emperor wrote these orders without knowledge of the current situation. If Leopold knew the Ottomans were divided by a river, Trapped in mid-crossing, vulnerable as never before, he would order an attack. Eugene is not defying his sovereign. He is acting as his sovereign would if fully informed. It is a rationalization, but it allows him to continue without the weight of certain guilt. At 3 o'clock, the swamps finally give way to firmer ground, and the advance guard reaches a low ridge that provides the first clear view of Zenta. What they see justifies every mile of agony. The Ottoman army sprawls across both sides of the Tisza, with a vast encampment of tents and wagons and men stretching as far as the eye can see. The pontoon bridge is visible, a fragile line across the water, crowded with soldiers and animals still attempting to cross. On the eastern bank, perhaps 40,000 Ottoman infantry wait in a rough semicircle protected by trenches and overturned carts. Their cavalry and artillery stand uselessly on the western bank, unable to support their comrades. The trap is even more perfect than Eugene dared hope. But the Ottomans have seen them. Across the plain, Ottoman scouts on horseback point and shout, galloping back toward their camp with news that shatters the afternoon calm. Within minutes, drums begin beating the alarm, a stuttering rhythm that carries across the flat country. Officers sprint through the encampment shouting orders. Soldiers grab weapons and run toward defensive positions. On the western bank, Sultan Mustafa watches the disaster unfold, unable to help, separated from his infantry by a river that might as well be an ocean. He has made the fundamental error of warfare. He has allowed his force to be divided in the face of the enemy. Now he will pay for it. Eugene allows himself a thin smile. Then he begins issuing orders for deployment, and his voice carries the absolute confidence of a man who knows he has already won. The Habsburg army shakes out from march column into battle formation with practiced efficiency. This is what years of drilling produce: the ability to transform chaos into order while under observation by the enemy. Infantry regiments move to their assigned positions, each commander knowing his place in the larger formation. Cavalry dismounts, troopers checking girths and drawing weapons, preparing to fight on foot where horses would be more liability than asset in the trenches ahead. Artillery crews manhandle their guns into position, already calculating range and elevation for the targets they will soon engage. Eugene's tactical plan is elegant in its simplicity. He will arrange his army in a great crescent, like a bow drawn around the Ottoman bridgehead. The curve of the formation will allow him to bring maximum firepower to bear from multiple angles, while preventing the enemy from concentrating their defence. General Guido Starhemberg will command the left wing, positioned along the riverbank itself, with orders to probe for weak points and, if opportunity permits, cross the Tisza on foot to attack the Ottoman rear. The right wing will assault the trenches directly, accepting casualties to fix the enemy in place. The centre, under Eugene's personal command, will watch for the moment when Ottoman lines begin to crack, then commit the reserves to break them completely. The key to the entire battle lies in destroying the pontoon bridge. As long as that lifeline exists, Ottoman soldiers can escape to the western bank, and the Sultan can send reinforcements to the eastern side. The bridge must be cut, trapping the infantry against the river with no hope of retreat. Eugene positions his artillery carefully. 60 guns arranged in multiple batteries with overlapping fields of fire. Their primary target, the floating span of boats and planks that represents the Ottomans' only salvation. On the Ottoman side, Grand Vizier Elmas, Mehmed Pasha, recognizes the magnitude of the catastrophe unfolding. He is 38 years old, a man of renowned intelligence and physical beauty. His name means diamond, who has risen through merit rather than birth. He understands exactly what is about to happen. The Habsburg army will attack before nightfall, will destroy the bridge, will slaughter the infantry trapped on the eastern bank. There is no good response. He can order a retreat across the bridge immediately, but the structure cannot handle a panicked rush. It will collapse under the weight, drowning thousands. He can form a defensive perimeter and hope to hold until darkness allows an escape, but the trenches are incomplete and his men are exhausted. He can attack, attempting to drive the Habsburgs back before they complete their deployment. But his cavalry and artillery are on the wrong side of the river. Elmas chooses to defend. He sends riders across the bridge to Sultan Mustafa, begging for reinforcements, requesting that cavalry ford the river upstream and attack the Habsburg flanks. He orders his janissaries to form lines behind the trenches, their matchlocks loaded, powder dry, prepared to sell their lives as expensively as possible. He places his best officers in charge of each section of the perimeter. Then he draws his sword and walks among the men, speaking calmly, reminding them that they are the Sultan's chosen soldiers, that paradise awaits those who fall in defense of Islam, that their names will be remembered in songs for 1,000 years. The janissaries listen with grim faces. They are professionals. They understand the situation, but they do not break. They do not flee. They load their weapons and wait for the enemy to come within range. Whatever happens in the next hours, the Sultan's infantry will not die as cowards. Across the plain, the Habsburg artillery completes its deployment. Gun captains call out ranges. Crews load powder and shot. Linstocks smoulder, ready to touch off the first volley. Eugene raises his hand, looking along the line of his army, ensuring every unit is in position. 50,000 men stand ready, weapons glinting in the afternoon sun. The air smells of grass and horses and fear. Eugene drops his hand. The guns roar. The sound of 60 cannon firing simultaneously is not a sound, but a physical force that strikes the body like a fist. The boom rolls across the plain, echoes off the distant hills, sends flocks of birds screaming into the sky. Smoke erupts in a continuous white wall, obscuring the gunners, drifting downrange toward the Ottoman positions. Then the iron arrives. Cannonballs weighing 12 pounds, 24 pounds, 36 pounds hurtle through the air at velocities too fast for the eye to track. You hear them coming, a rising shriek that ends in impact. The first volley targets the Ottoman trenches and the densely packed troops behind them. Solid shot ploughs through earth and timber and flesh with equal indifference. A ball strikes a wagon wheel, explodes it into splinters, continues into the men sheltering behind. Another skips across the ground like a stone on water, each bounce taking off a limb or a head until it buries itself in the mud. A third strikes the trench wall directly, collapses an entire section, burying defenders under tons of dirt. But the primary target is the pontoon bridge. 10 guns focus their fire on that fragile span of boats and planks. The first shots miss, raising geysers of spray. The gunners adjust elevation, reload, fire again. A cannonball strikes the third boat from the western bank, punches through the hull, sinks it in seconds. The bridge sags, planks cracking under strain. Ottoman soldiers packed on the span realize their danger too late. They try to run, but there are hundreds of men on that narrow structure, all pushing in different directions. The bridge sways, cables groan, more boats begin taking on water. On the western bank, Sultan Mustafa watches the bombardment with growing horror. He has sent orders for his cavalry to find a ford and cross to attack the Habsburg flanks, but the Tisza is wider and deeper than it appeared. And there are no easy crossings within miles. His artillery sits useless on this side, unable to elevate high enough to shoot across the river at the enemy guns pounding his infantry. He is the Sultan, commander of 100,000 men, and he can do nothing but watch his army die. The Habsburg infantry begins its advance. They move in lines, each regiment maintaining its formation, flags flying, drums beating the step. The distance is 800 yards at the start. Ottoman muskets have an effective range of perhaps 100 yards, which means the Habsburg soldiers must walk through 700 yards of open ground before they can fire back. But the terrain is flat and the approach is good. They come steadily, boots crushing grass, the sun behind them casting long shadows across the field. At 500 yards, the Ottoman artillery on the eastern bank, a handful of light field pieces that crossed before the bridge came under fire, opens up. The guns are poorly positioned and have limited ammunition, but they do their work. A round shot tears through a Habsburg infantry company, killing 3 men instantly, wounding a dozen more. The line closes up, steps over the bodies, continues. Another shot strikes a colour guard, takes the flag bearer's head off at the neck. The man beside him catches the standard before it falls, lifts it high, keeps walking. At 300 yards, some of the Janissaries cannot restrain themselves and fire their matchlocks despite the range being too long. White smoke blossoms along the Ottoman line. Bullets whine overhead, most falling short, a few finding targets through sheer volume of fire. Men fall in the Habsburg ranks, but not many, not yet. The real killing will begin soon enough. At 100 yards, the Habsburg officers bellow commands. The lines halt, dress ranks, bring muskets to shoulders. 5,000 flintlocks level at the Ottoman trenches. The volley, when it comes, sounds like the earth splitting open. A wall of lead sweeps across the defensive position, striking men in the trenches, in the wagons, standing behind inadequate cover. Bodies jerk and fall. Screams pierce the smoke. The Janissaries fire back, their own volley crashing out seconds later, and now both sides are obscured by powder smoke so thick the sun becomes a dim orange smudge. The battle has truly begun, and it will not stop until one side is annihilated. In the choking smoke and chaos of close-range musketry, the individual soldiers lose all sense of the larger battle. They see only what lies immediately before them. The next man to kill, the next piece of cover, the next few seconds of survival. But from horseback, Eugene maintains his broader view. He watches the right wing engage the Ottoman trenches in a grinding firefight that will produce no decision, only corpses. He watches his artillery continue to pound the pontoon bridge, which sags lower with each impact, but stubbornly refuses to break completely. He watches, waiting for the moment when he can commit his reserves and transform a stalemate into a massacre. That moment comes on the left flank, where Guido Starhemberg makes a discovery that changes everything. The Tisza River, viewed from the eastern bank, appears uniformly deep and swift. But Starhemberg's scouts have been wading into the shallows, testing the bottom, and they report back with startling news. 300 yards upstream from the pontoon bridge, a sandbar extends halfway across the river. During high water, it would be submerged and useless. But in September's low water, a man can wade across in water only chest deep. Infantry can cross there. They can get behind the Ottoman positions and attack from the rear. Starhemberg does not wait for permission. He orders 2 infantry regiments to strip off their heavy equipment, fix bayonets, and follow him into the water. The soldiers look at him like he is mad, then obey. They step into the Tisza, gasping at the cold, feeling the current pull at their legs. The water rises to their waists, their chests. Men shorter than average must swim. Some muskets are held overhead, powder horns kept dry. They stumble on hidden rocks, support each other when someone slips, keep moving toward the far bank. The Ottomans defending the bridgehead do not notice the flanking manoeuvre until it is too late. All their attention focuses forward on the Habsburg army attacking their trenches. When shouts of alarm finally ring out from the rear, when officers turn to see Austrian infantry emerging dripping from the river 300 yards behind their defensive line, the trap has already closed. The Ottoman forces are now surrounded on 3 sides, Habsburg infantry attacking from the east, Starhemberg's sodden troops attacking from the west, the river cutting off retreat to the south. The 4th side, the north, U is held by Habsburg cavalry, who have found the gap in the incomplete outer trench and are pouring through like water through a burst dam. The Ottoman defence, which had held firm despite heavy casualties, begins to fragment. Units that had maintained cohesion under frontal assault cannot cope with attacks from multiple directions. Janissaries pivot to face threats from behind, leaving their front undefended. Officers scream contradictory orders. Some soldiers try to fight their way toward the bridge. Others form small defensive squares, preparing to die in place. A few throw down their weapons and raise their hands in surrender, but in the smoke and noise, no one is taking prisoners. The fighting at the trenches reaches a savage intensity that veterans will remember as the worst they have ever experienced. Habsburg soldiers leap down into the excavations, where muskets are useless, and men fight with bayonets, swords, musket butts, fists, teeth. The trenches are 5 feet deep and 3 feet wide, cramped spaces where you cannot swing a blade properly, where you stab and thrust and grapple in the mud. Men slip on blood, fall onto dead comrades, die with their faces pressed into dirt. The screaming becomes constant, an inhuman chorus of rage and pain and terror that drowns out even the artillery. Grand Vizier Elmas Mehmed Pasha dies in these trenches, cut down not by Habsburg soldiers, but by his own Janissaries. The exact circumstances are unclear. Some accounts claim he tried to surrender, others that he attempted to flee, still others that he was killed by panicking troops who blamed him for the catastrophe. What is certain is that his body is found later with multiple sword wounds, and the seal of his office is missing. With the Grand Vizier dead, Ottoman command structure collapses entirely. Each unit fights alone, without coordination, without hope. The pontoon bridge, hammered by artillery for over an hour, finally breaks. A cannonball severs the cable holding the northern section, and half the span swings free, carried downstream by the current. Soldiers still on the bridge scream as they realize what is happening. Some try to jump to boats that are pulling away. Others simply fall into the water, dragged under by their armor and equipment. The bridge is gone, and with it any possibility of escape. Thousands of Ottoman soldiers make a desperate decision. They will swim for the western bank. It is 200 yards of cold, swift water, but it seems preferable to staying and being slaughtered. They strip off armor, abandon weapons, plunge into the Tisza. What they have not accounted for is that Habsburg troops now control both banks. Marksmen line the shore, shooting into the mass of swimmers. The water around the collapsed bridge turns red. Bodies float downstream, arms outstretched, carried away by the current that cares nothing for empires or causes or the dreams of young men who will never see home again. The sun sets on a scene from hell. The battle continues into darkness, lit by burning wagons and muzzle flashes. Ottoman resistance has been broken, but the killing goes on. Habsburg soldiers hunting survivors through the trenches and the camp, taking revenge for years of war. By midnight, when exhaustion finally stills the violence, the eastern bank of the Tisza has become a charnel house. The Ottomans have ceased to exist as a fighting force. They have been annihilated. In the final hours of the battle, mercy vanishes. This is no longer combat between soldiers, but extermination. Habsburg troops storm through the Ottoman camp, bayoneting the wounded, shooting prisoners, setting tents ablaze. Officers try to restore discipline, shouting orders to take captives for ransom. But the men are beyond listening. They have marched for 10 hours, fought for 6 more, lost friends and brothers, and now they want blood payment. The Janissaries, who might have been spared for their military reputation, die to the last man because they refuse to surrender. They go down fighting, knives in hand, curses on their lips, faithful to their oath even in defeat. The trenches, which served as defensive positions during the battle, become mass graves afterward. When Habsburg soldiers methodically search them the next morning, they find layers of bodies stacked 3 and 4 deep, Ottoman and Austrian intermingled in death, locked together in final grapples. The smell is overwhelming, blood and shit and powder smoke and earth. Flies arrive in clouds and crows, and the human scavengers who follow every army to strip the dead of anything valuable. Gold teeth are pried from corpses, rings are cut from swollen fingers, even the buttons on uniforms are worth taking. But the greatest horror occurs in the river. The Tisza has become a conveyor of corpses, carrying bodies downstream for miles, depositing them on sandbars and muddy banks, where they will rot under the autumn sun. Local peasants will spend weeks clearing the river, dragging out the dead, burning them in mass pyres that stain the sky black. The exact number who drowned is never determined. Estimates range from 8,000 to 12,000, men who survived years of campaigning only to die in water over their heads, weighed down by equipment their commanders insisted they could not abandon. Grand Vizier Elmas. Mehmed Pasha's body is found in the trenches, identified by his rich clothing and the distinctive scar on his left hand. He is buried with military honours by the Habsburgs, recognition of a worthy opponent, but 5 provincial governors die alongside him. The Pashas of Anatolia, Adana, Diyarbakir, Marash, and Rumelia. 33 agas of various military units are killed. The 7 horsetails, the standards that signify high Ottoman authority, are captured, an unprecedented humiliation. The entire command structure of the Ottoman army in Hungary has been decapitated in a single afternoon. On the western bank, Sultan Mustafa watches the destruction of his infantry with rage and grief that will haunt him for the rest of his short life. His cavalry stands ready to charge, but there is nowhere to charge. His artillery could pound the Habsburg positions, but his own men are mixed with the enemy. He would kill as many Ottomans as Christians. He is paralyzed by the river, forced to witness his army's death without being able to influence it. When darkness finally hides the carnage, his advisors urge immediate retreat. The Habsburg army might find a ford during the night and attack this side of the river. Or they must leave now, while they still can. Mustafa flees. There is no other word for it. He abandons the battlefield without stopping, riding through the night toward Timisoara, leaving behind everything that slows his flight. His personal baggage train, laden with the plunder of 3 campaigns, is captured intact. His artillery, 87 heavy guns that took years to cast and months to transport, is seized by Eugene's soldiers. His treasury chest, containing 3 million piastres in gold and silver, falls into Habsburg hands. But worst of all, most humiliating beyond measure, is the loss of the state seal. The seal is a symbol of Ottoman authority more important than any crown or sceptre. Sultans carry it on campaign, using it to authenticate orders and treaties. It bears the inscription, Mustafa, son of Mehmed Han, is always victorious, and the year of his accession in the Islamic calendar. No enemy has ever captured a reigning sultan's seal. It is unthinkable, a sacrilege, proof of divine displeasure. When news spreads through the Ottoman Empire that the seal has fallen to Christian hands, people understand Allah has withdrawn his favour. The tide has turned. Prince Eugene of Savoy rides across the battlefield at dawn, surveying his victory. Bodies lie so thick in places that his horse must step carefully to avoid treading on them. The smell makes him cover his mouth with a cloth. But his face shows satisfaction, not horror. He has disobeyed the emperor's orders and staked his career on a single gamble. Now he holds proof that he was right. Total, unambiguous victory. The count of Ottoman dead will be disputed for centuries. Habsburg reports claim 30,000 killed in action and another 10,000 drowned, for a total of 40,000 casualties out of an army of 60,000. Ottoman accounts naturally present lower figures, 7 to 8,000 dead, acknowledging a defeat, but not a catastrophe. Modern historians split the difference, estimating 25,000 Ottoman dead, with perhaps 5,000 captured and another 5,000 wounded, seriously enough to be left behind when Mustafa fled. Against this, the Habsburgs lost 429 killed and 1,568 wounded, a casualty ratio of nearly 60 to 1. Numbers cannot capture the scale of the disaster. The Ottoman Empire has lost not merely an army, but the cream of its military leadership, its most experienced janissaries, its artillery train, its treasury, and its sacred seal. Eugene has not won a battle. He has inflicted a wound that will never fully heal. The day after the battle, silence settles over Zenta. The guns have stopped. The screaming has stopped. Only the wind moves across the field, carrying the smell of death. Habsburg soldiers begin the grim work of clearing bodies, stripping them of valuables, separating friend from foe. The dead are identified when possible. Officers' corpses are treated with some respect. Common soldiers are dumped in mass graves with perfunctory prayers. Ottoman wounded who cannot walk are given water and left to fate. Some survive, most do not. The captured Ottoman baggage train provides astonishing plunder. 9,000 carts and wagons, each loaded with supplies, equipment, or personal possessions. 6,000 camels and 15,000 oxen that will feed the Habsburg army for months. 423 battle standards that will hang in Vienna's churches as victory trophies. The Sultan's personal tent, a pavilion of silk and gold that takes 40 men to move. And most important, the items that carry symbolic rather than material value. The 7 horsetails, the Grand Vizier's seal of office, and the state seal of Sultan Mustafa II. Prince Eugene personally presents the state seal to Emperor Leopold in Vienna. The ceremony occurs in November, after Eugene has returned in triumph from a brutal raid into Ottoman Bosnia, where his army sacked Sarajevo and burned every village within 50 miles. Vienna celebrates with fireworks, religious processions, public feasts that last for days. To Pope Innocent XII, orders Te Deums sung in churches across Catholic Europe. Protestant nations, no friends of the Habsburgs, nevertheless congratulate Leopold on the victory. For the first time in living memory, Christian Europe is united in something other than fear of the Turks. Eugene is 34 years old and suddenly the most famous soldier in Europe. The French court, which once mocked his physique and denied him a commission, now speaks his name with grudging respect. Italian princes commission paintings of his triumph. German poets write epics, comparing him to ancient heroes. He has achieved what every military commander desires, a perfect victory, the kind that ends wars rather than prolonging them. And he has erased, in a single afternoon, the stain of his earlier career when he served competently but without distinction. Now he is Prince Eugene the Noble Knight, saviour of Christendom, scourge of the infidel. The borrowed money that saved the Habsburg army before Zenta is repaid from captured Ottoman treasure. Eugene's personal finances, strained to breaking by the loans, recover and then flourish. He purchases estates, builds palaces, becomes wealthy as well as famous. But more important than money or fame is the emperor's trust. Leopold gives Eugene independent command of future campaigns, free from the caution and interference that had hampered previous generals. This trust will lead to more victories. Turin in 1706, where Eugene saves Italy from French conquest. Blenheim in 1704, fighting alongside the Duke of Marlborough to crush Louis XIV's armies. Belgrade in 1717, his masterpiece, where he captures the city that had resisted Habsburg sieges for decades. On the Ottoman side, the immediate aftermath is catastrophic in every dimension. Sultan Mustafa reaches Timisoara in a state of shock, unable to speak coherently for days. He has lost more than an army. He has lost his confidence, his authority, his sense of divine favour. The psychological wound proves more crippling than the material losses. In the years following Zenta, Mustafa increasingly withdraws from governance, delegating power to religious authorities and court factions. He becomes known for paranoia and indecision, the warrior sultan transformed into a haunted man. The military consequences are immediate and severe. The Ottoman Empire can no longer prosecute offensive operations in Hungary. The troops who survived Zenta are scattered and demoralized. Recruiting new janissaries and training them to effectiveness requires years. Replacing the artillery is expensive and slow. The imperial foundries can produce perhaps 10 guns per year, meaning full restoration will take a decade. The empire's treasury, already strained by 14 years of war, cannot sustain continued campaigns. Local governors in the Balkans and Anatolia, sensing weakness, begin to withhold tax revenue and act with increased independence. Diplomatically, Zenta forces the Ottomans to accept what they have resisted for decades. They must negotiate with Christian powers as equals rather than dictating terms as conquerors. The Holy League senses blood in the water. Austrian envoys demand territorial concessions. Russian armies advance on Azov. Venetian fleets raid Ottoman islands with impunity. The Sultan, who proclaimed he would sacrifice his body for religion, finds himself begging for peace. Within months of Zenta, peace negotiations begin at the village of Karlovitz, near Belgrade. For 72 days, diplomats from the Ottoman Empire, Austria, Poland, Venice and Russia argue over maps and treaties. The Ottomans are represented by capable negotiators who fight for every clause, but they negotiate from weakness. The final treaty, signed on January 26, 1699, represents the greatest territorial loss in Ottoman history. Hungary, Transylvania, Croatia, Slavonia, all gone, transferred to Habsburg control. Poland regains Podolia. Venice takes Dalmatia and the Morea. In a separate treaty the following year, Russia secures Azov and the right to maintain a permanent diplomatic mission in Constantinople. The Treaty of Karlovitz removes over 160,000 square kilometres of European territory from Ottoman control. For an empire that defined itself by expansion, that justified its existence through holy war and conquest, this represents not merely defeat, but existential crisis. The Ottomans have been expanding into Europe since 1361 for 338 years. Now, for the first time, they are retreating. The psychological impact is more devastating than the material loss. Sultan Mustafa II never recovers. In 1703, a military revolt known as the Edirne event forces his abdication. He lives 6 more years in confinement, dying at age 39. His health broken by depression and what modern doctors might diagnose as post-traumatic stress. His sons Mahmud and Osman will later become sultans, but neither can restore the glory their father lost at Zenta. The battlefield itself returns to quiet. Peasants reclaim the land, ploughing under bones, finding coins and musket balls in the soil. The Tisza flows on, carrying no memory of the men who drowned in its water. Within a generation, travellers passing through Zenta will see no evidence that history changed here, that empires rose and fell on this ground. But the consequences ripple outward through time, reshaping the map of Europe and the fate of nations for centuries to come. The Battle of Zenta ended the Ottoman Empire's expansion into Europe. That sentence, simple enough to write, contains within it the transformation of an entire civilization. For 3 centuries, since Ottoman armies first crossed the Dardanelles into Europe in 1354, the empire's trajectory had been upward. Conquest followed conquest. The Balkans fell, then Hungary, then raids, reached as far as Germany and Italy. Each generation of sultans expanded the boundaries. Each victory confirmed that Allah favoured the faithful. Zenta reversed that arc. After September 11th, 1697, the Ottoman Empire in Europe began its long contraction, a process that would not end until 1912, when the Balkan Wars stripped away the last European territories except a small holding around Constantinople. The immediate strategic consequences were obvious. Habsburg Austria became the dominant power in Central Europe, controlling Hungary and using it as a base to project influence into the Balkans. The Pannonian Plain, which had been a borderland between empires, became Austrian interior territory. The military frontier was established, a militarized zone where soldier settlers received land in exchange for defending against Ottoman raids. This system would persist for over a century, creating a permanent barrier that the Ottomans could never again breach. Russia benefited as much as Austria. With the Ottoman threat reduced, Peter the Great could focus on his wars against Sweden in the Baltic. The Treaty of Constantinople gave Russia its first permanent foothold on the Black Sea, a strategic asset that subsequent Tsars would expand until Russian power dominated the entire northern shore. The centuries-long Russo-Turkish Wars, which would grind through the 18th and 19th centuries, began from the position of strength Russia gained after Zenta. Venice enjoyed a brief renaissance. The capture of the Morea gave Venetian merchants renewed access to Greek trade and Mediterranean power projection. But Venice was a republic in decline, and within 2 decades it would lose the Morea back to the Ottomans. The battle bought Venice time, but could not reverse its long decay. By the 18th century, Venice would be a museum of former glory, living on past reputation rather than present strength. Poland-Lithuania regained territory, but not vitality. The great Commonwealth that had once stopped Ottoman expansion at Vienna was entering its death spiral, victim of weak kings and interfering neighbours. Within a century, Poland would be partitioned between Russia, Prussia, and Austria, erased from the map as a sovereign state. Zenta gave Poland a victorious last act, but it was still a last act. For the Habsburg Empire, Zenta marked the beginning of greatness, the same dynasty that would later produce Maria Theresa and rule a multicultural empire stretching from Belgium to Romania, built its power on the foundation Eugene laid. The acquisition of Hungary provided agricultural wealth, military manpower, and strategic depth. The reputation gained from defeating the Ottomans enhanced Habsburg prestige throughout Europe. When the War of Spanish Succession erupted, Austria fought as a great power, not a desperate defender of Christendom's borders. The philosophical meaning of Zenta extends beyond territorial transfers and power balances. The battle marked a shift in European consciousness from defence to offence, from survival to dominance. For generations, European politics had been shaped by Ottoman pressure. Now that pressure was gone, and Europeans could turn their competitive energies against each other, rather than uniting against a common threat. The 18th century's wars, Spanish Succession, Austrian Succession, 7 Years' War, were intra-European conflicts fought without the shadow of Istanbul falling across them. The Ottoman Empire became what historians call the sick man of Europe, a phrase that would echo for 2 centuries. The sickness was not merely military or economic, but psychological. An empire that had defined itself through conquest, that had built its institutions around continuous expansion, could not easily adapt to contraction and defence. Reform efforts would come. The Tanzimat modernization in the 19th century, westernization of the military and administration, but none could restore the empire to its former trajectory. The fundamental fact established at Zenta remained: Christian Europe had become stronger than Muslim Turkey, and that imbalance would only increase. Prince Eugene of Savoy went on to compile one of history's most remarkable military records. After Zenta came Turin, where he relieved the city from French siege and saved Italy for Austria. Then Blenheim, partnering with the Duke of Marlborough to destroy French armies at the height of Louis XIV's power. Oudenarde and Malplaquet followed, brutal victories that broke French offensive capability. In 1716 and 1717, Eugene returned to fight the Ottomans again, winning at Petrovaradin and capturing Belgrade in a campaign considered his masterpiece. Napoleon, studying military history decades later, named Eugene among the 7 greatest generals of all time, in company with Alexander, Hannibal, and Caesar. Eugene died in 1736 at age 73, the last of the great generals who bridged the early modern and modern periods. He left no heir, he never married, but his legacy shaped European military thinking for generations. The preference for aggressive offensive action, the willingness to disobey orders when opportunity beckoned, the use of speed and surprise to overcome numerical disadvantage, all became standard doctrine because Eugene demonstrated their effectiveness. Sultan Mustafa II is remembered, when he is remembered at all, as the Sultan who lost Hungary. His early victories at Lugos and Ulaş are footnotes to the disaster at Zenta. His poetry, written under the pen name Meftuni, is studied by scholars of Ottoman literature, but unknown to the general public. His sons Mahmud I and Osman III ruled competently but without distinction. The line of warrior sultans who personally led armies died with Mustafa. Future rulers would command from palaces, not battlefields, presiding over decline rather than conquest. The battlefield at Zenta is quiet now, a place where the Tisza still flows between low banks, where grass covers the ground where trenches once ran. A small monument marks the site, visited by history enthusiasts and ignored by everyone else. The pontoon bridge is long gone, though the ford remains where Ottoman soldiers once tried to cross to their deaths. Local farmers occasionally plough up artifacts, musket balls, belt buckles, coins bearing the faces of forgotten emperors. These relics end up in museums or private collections, mute witnesses to the day when empires met and one was broken. 3 centuries later, the consequences of that September afternoon continue to shape our world. The borders drawn after Zenta influenced the borders drawn after World War I, which influenced the borders of modern Europe. The Ottoman retreat from Europe created power vacuums that sparked nationalism in the Balkans, nationalism that would contribute to World War I and the Yugoslav wars of the 1990s. The sick man of Europe finally died in 1922, replaced by the secular Turkish Republic, but the ghost of Ottoman greatness haunts Turkish politics still. At Zenta, this on a day that started with mist on the river and ended with the water running red, Prince Eugene of Savoy made a decision that reverberated through time. He chose to attack against explicit orders, to risk his career and his army on a single throw. He won, and in winning, changed the trajectory of civilizations. The Ottoman Empire, which had seemed eternal, began its long decline. Christian Europe, which had lived in fear for centuries, became confident and aggressive. The modern world, with all its imbalances and contradictions, was shaped in part by what happened when 2 armies met at a river crossing in the Hungarian plains. The battle lasted 6 hours. The consequences endure.